The first warning didn't sound like danger. It sounded like wet, determined dragging across the porch boards and the soft grunt of a tired dog. By the time she saw what he'd brought home, it was already too late for normal. In the space of a few heartbeats, the quiet mountain afternoon twisted into something she'd never forget, and she realized that if they stayed 1 second longer, the mountain that had saved her life might finish what the world once started. Mara had come to these mountains to disappear, and for 2 years they'd obliged. The peaks didn't ask questions about why her hands still shook sometimes, or why she woke from dreams with her heart racing. Up here, there were only simple truths. Firewood needs chopping, roofs need patching, snow never cares who you used to be. Her house was barely more than a sturdy shack clinging to the slope, with a warped front porch and a view that made even bad days feel survivable. The only witness to the life she'd rebuilt was a dog who understood silence better than any human ever had. His name was Ranger, though he hadn't earned it through training or pedigree. She'd found him thin as wire and mean with hunger near the old logging road, ribs showing beneath mud-matted fur. Someone had tied an orange hunting ribbon around his neck like a joke. When she'd knelt and offered the last piece of jerky from her pocket, he hadn't wagged his tail. He'd just stared at her with tired, suspicious eyes, as if asking, "Is this another trick?" It took days, a few more offerings, and a lot of quiet, before he finally chose to stay. Ranger wasn't a cuddling dog. He was a shadow that moved when she moved, lay where she lay, and stood guard at the edge of the tree line every night, like he'd been assigned the job by something older than both of them. He caught mice before they chewed through her food stores, barked warnings at approaching strangers long before their engines could be heard, and on bad days, rested his head on her knee until her breathing slowed. In a world that had once taken more from her than it gave, Ranger was the one thing she hadn't lost. That morning had started like any other, frost silvering the grass, her breath hanging in the air as she split logs, the distant rush of the river swollen from last week's rain. She'd noticed the birds first, or rather, that there weren't any. Usually the spruce were loud with their arguments by sunrise, but the branches were still, as if the forest were holding its breath. Mara had chalked it up to weather, a front moving in maybe. Clouds gathered in the west like bruises, but in the mountains that meant very little. Storms came and went. She'd learned not to flinch at every darkening sky. By noon, the air felt wrong, too heavy, as if the pressure had dropped, but the storm refused to break. The river's usual chatter had deepened into a low, constant growl that vibrated faintly in her chest. She caught herself, checking the clock more often than made sense. There was nowhere to be, no one expecting her, yet unease hummed under her skin. Ranger picked up on it. He paced more than usual, nails ticking over the floorboards, then disappeared downhill toward the river with a low woof, like he'd been called to investigate a rumor. Mara let him go. He knew these woods better than she ever would. She was on the porch repairing a loose railing when she heard it, a scraping, dragging sound from the path, punctuated by ragged dog breaths. "Ranger," she called, setting down the hammer. No answer, just another wet scrape. Her stomach tightened. Predators dragged things. Injured animals dragged themselves. She moved to the porch steps, wiping her hands on her jeans, unaware that the moment her eyes found him, everything she thought she understood about this mountain was about to shift. Ranger emerged from the trees like he'd fought the forest itself. His fur was soaked, darkened to almost black, his paws leaving muddy streaks. He limped slightly, not from pain but from sheer exhaustion. Clenched between his teeth was something that didn't belong in any world she knew. A swollen, bright red fish, hanging heavy and grotesque, its skin bristling with short, rigid spikes like a landmine disguised as meat. It didn't flop or twitch. It simply hung there, bloated and stiff, as if daring anyone to touch it. "Whoa! Hey! Drop it!" Mara breathed, her voice sharper than she intended. Instinctively, she took a step back. Ranger froze, sides heaving, and met her gaze. His eyes shone with the wild pride of a dog bringing home treasure. But there was something else there too. Confusion, maybe. Even he seemed unsettled by what he'd found. The river spit out plenty of odd things every spring, but nothing like this. This looked less like a fish and more like a weapon that had grown scales by mistake. She crouched slowly, palms open, speaking to him the way she did when storms rattled the windows. "Easy, boy. That's not dinner, okay?" Ranger whined, muffled through his clenched jaw, and took a few dragging steps closer. The fish scraped along the wood, leaving a smeared trail of dark, almost black slime that steamed faintly in the cool air. Mara's throat tightened. Fish didn't steam, not like that. The smell hit her a heartbeat later, metallic and chemical all at once, as if rotting seaweed had been soaked in gasoline. "Ranger, drop it. Now." The command left no room for argument. Something in her tone cut through whatever primal urge told him to hold on to his prize. He released it with a reluctant chuff. The fish thudded against the boards with a thick, wet sound. Up close, it was even worse. Its eyes weren't cloudy like dead fish she'd cleaned before. They were glassy and too clear, reflecting her face in tiny, warped mirrors. The spikes covering its skin flexed almost imperceptibly, as if responding to the change in air. She reached out on reflex, then caught herself and pulled her hand back. Her fingertips tingled as though they'd already brushed something poisonous. She grabbed a broken broom handle from beside the door and nudged the creature. Its body yielded like half-set jelly, then bounced back, leaving another smear of tar-colored slime on the wood. "What are you?" she muttered. The river that fed the valley came from snowmelt and glacial streams. It was too cold and too high for tropical nonsense. This thing looked like it belonged in some deep, pressure-crushed trench, not at 6,000 feet, on her porch. Ranger sneezed and shook his head, then licked at a fleck of slime on his whiskers. "Don't!" Mara's shout came too late. His tongue had already made contact. For a second, nothing happened. Then Ranger recoiled violently, shaking his head as if he'd bitten an electric fence. A strangled yelp tore from his throat. He pawed at his muzzle, eyes wide, pupils blown. Panic knifed through her. Okay, come here." She grabbed his collar, dragging him away from the fish. A thin string of foam slid from the corner of his mouth, trembling in the cold air before breaking. Mara hauled him into the cabin, heart pounding so hard she could hear it. She wiped his muzzle with a damp cloth, ignoring his attempts to pull away. His breathing came fast and shallow. For a terrifying 30 seconds, she thought he might seize, might collapse right there on the rug where he slept every night. But the trembling eased. The frantic darting of his eyes slowed. He slumped against her leg, shivering, then licked her wrist weakly, as if apologizing for scaring her. She realized she was whispering his name over and over like a prayer she'd once stopped believing in. When his breathing leveled out, she forced herself to move. She rinsed the cloth, watching the water in the basin swirl into a faint reddish tint before she dumped it outside. Her mind raced. Poison, toxin, contamination. The government dam downriver had been a sore topic in town for years. Some project to regulate flow, generate power, make the valley useful. Environmental reports came and went, full of graphs and assurances. She usually ignored them. She didn't care about politics. She cared that the river stayed cold and clear and predictable. But what if it no longer was? She stepped back onto the porch, every nerve braced. The strange fish lay exactly where they'd left it, though the slime around it had spread, seeping like spilled ink between the cracks of the boards. The air felt heavier, as if whatever leaked from it wasn't just chemical, but wrong on some deeper level. She realized she was standing there barehanded and retreated long enough to grab her thick leather work gloves and an old metal bucket from beside the wood pile. If this thing had already hurt Ranger with a single lick, she wasn't about to let it sit there and soak into the wood that led directly into her home. She slid the fish into the bucket with the broom handle, trying not to gag as its spikes scraped metal. Up close, she could see that the spikes weren't fixed. Tiny muscles at their base twitched, adjusting angle like a sea urchin searching for purchase. The gills pulsed once, slowly, then stilled. "You're supposed to be dead," she whispered. "Why don't you know that?" She carried the bucket off the porch and down the path, away from the house, each step feeling heavier than the last. Ranger tried to follow, but she pointed him back with a sharp gesture. "Stay." At the edge of her clearing, where the pines crowded close, she dug a shallow pit with her boot heel and the edge of an old shovel. She had a sudden, irrational urge to bury the fish deep, to hide it from the sky itself. But some other part of her said no. You don't bury evidence. You understand it. It was a habit from her old life, from the work she'd done before grief and exhaustion had driven her into the mountains. Back then, she'd been trained to run toward mystery, to catalog, to report. That life had ended with a phone call on a rainy highway. Yet some instincts never truly left. Instead of burying it, she set the bucket down on a flat rock and pulled out her phone. No signal, of course. There almost never was up here unless the weather was perfect and you stood in exactly the right spot. She took pictures anyway, close-ups of the fish's spines, its unnatural color, the slime trail. Maybe she'd hike down to town tomorrow and show them to Doc Hayes or that young ranger assigned to the dam project. Maybe they'd laugh, or maybe they'd go pale and start making calls. Either way, someone needed to know. This wasn't right. As she snapped the last photo, the ground trembled beneath her boots. Not a full quake, just a subtle, rolling shiver, like the mountain clearing its throat. Birds exploded out of the trees all at once, a dark cloud that wheeled overhead before shooting down valley. Mara froze, phone clutched tight, pulse spiking. The river's low growl intensified into a roar, loud enough now to swallow thought. Ranger barked from the porch, sharp and urgent. The bucket rattled on the rock, the fish inside jostling with a wet slap. Mara turned toward the sound of the river. From this vantage, she could see only treetops and a sliver of silver water far below. But something was wrong with the color. Too foamy, too churned. A smell rode the updraft a second later, thick and sharp and chemical, slamming into the back of her throat. Her memories supplied images she wished they wouldn't. Warehouses gone wrong, spill sites, men in hazmat suits standing over dead streams. Another tremor rolled under her feet, stronger this time. Somewhere deep in the valley, something had shifted, broken. Ranger bounded down the path toward her, ignoring her earlier command. His ears were pinned back, eyes wide, every line of his body screaming one clear message. We have to go. He skidded to a stop beside her and shoved his nose against her hip, whining low. Behind him, the air seemed to shimmer faintly, as if heat waves rose from the cold ground. Mara realized her skin was tingling, a prickling itch up her arms and neck. She glanced at the bucket. The fish's spines were fully extended now, rigid and glistening, as if reaching for the sky. A sound like distant thunder rolled through the valley, but the sky above remained clear. This thunder came from below, from the river gorge, from the dam, from whatever experiments or shortcuts or secrets had been sunk into the water over the past few years. Mara felt it in her bones. The mountain was warning them, the way animals warn each other before a storm breaks. She looked at Ranger. He stared back, chest heaving, then flicked a desperate glance uphill toward the narrow trail that led to the old fire lookout. High ground, away from the river. The realization hit her like a slap. This wasn't just one strange fish washed up by chance. This was a messenger. If the water was churning out things that burned on contact and made the earth itself shiver, then whatever was happening down there was only minutes away from reaching them. Maybe as a flood, maybe as a cloud, maybe as something she didn't have a name for yet. But every instinct she'd honed in her old life and every instinct the mountain had taught her screamed the same thing. "Okay," she whispered, throat dry. "Okay, we're going." She left the bucket where it sat, the red, spiked body inside pulsing faintly like a warning light. She sprinted back toward the cabin, Ranger already ahead of her, barking in short, frantic bursts. Inside, she grabbed her emergency pack from its hook by the door, already half prepared for fires, blizzards, broken bones. She'd always suspected the mountain might turn on her someday. She just hadn't expected the attack to come from the river below, carried on the back of a fish that didn't belong. As she slung the pack over her shoulders, the floorboards vibrated again, more violently. A mug fell from the shelf and shattered, coffee-stained shards skittering across the planks. A distant siren bled faintly through the roar of the river, rising and falling in a pattern she couldn't quite place. Ranger paced by the door, nails scratching, then let out a bark so sharp it felt like it split the air. Mara grabbed her jacket, one last photo of her brother from the windowsill, and the old compass that had guided her here in the first place. She didn't lock the door behind them. Doors meant nothing to water, and less to poison carried on the wind. Together they bolted up the trail toward the fire lookout, her lungs burning, Ranger never straying more than a few feet from her side. As they climbed, the valley behind them filled with a sound she'd only ever heard on television, a low, continuous roar that didn't stop between rumbles. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. Whatever was coming would be there whether she watched it arrive or not. And somewhere below, on a lonely rock near her clearing, a bright red fish in a metal bucket seemed to pulse in time with the mountain's shuddering heart. The air felt thinner the moment Emma and Ranger stepped beyond the ridge, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. Ranger kept close to her right side, posture low, eyes sharp. His fur stood on end in a way she'd never seen before, not even during storms or when wildcats roamed too close to the cabin. It wasn't fear. It was instinct. Warning. Below them, the valley stretched out in uneasy stillness. No wind stirred the treetops. No birds called. Even the river's voice, usually a constant murmur, seemed muted. Emma gripped the strap of her backpack tighter. It was hard not to think about the red, spiked fish now resting inside a sealed tin in her pack, its skin glossy, rubbery, unnatural, and the mark it left on the ground after Ranger dropped it, a faint trail of sizzling melt through the frost. "What did you bring me, boy?" she whispered. Ranger didn't look back, only pressed forward, tail rigid, nose twitching at scents she couldn't sense. Whatever the fish was, Ranger had understood the danger first. He always did. He'd pulled her from a mudslide once, and another time warned her off a patch of thin ice seconds before it cracked, but this time felt different. This wasn't nature misbehaving. This felt like something intruding. Halfway down the slope, Ranger froze. A deep rumble rolled through the earth beneath their boots. Emma staggered, dropping to one knee as the ground shivered. Rocks clattered. Snow slithered down the ridges in thin sheets. Ranger growled low, lips pulling back just slightly. Then silence fell again, deafening, absolute. Emma rose slowly. "Okay," she murmured, voice trembling despite her effort to steady it. "We keep moving." They followed the trembling earth toward the riverbed. The closer they got, the stronger the smell became, metallic, sharp, almost electrical. Ranger sneezed and shook his head but kept leading her. When they reached the water, Emma's stomach flipped. Hundreds of fish floated near the banks, bloated, distorted, covered in the same unnatural red, spike-lined skin. Some had burst open along their sides, revealing glowing orange-gold sacs pulsing inside like organs from a creature not meant for this world. Ranger whined softly and stepped back. Emma covered her mouth. "Oh, God." And then she saw footprints beside the river. Boots, small ones. A child's, fresh. She knelt, tracing them with gloved fingers. They led upriver toward a narrow canyon known for flash floods and unstable cliffs. No child would go that way voluntarily. Overhead, the sky darkened, not with storm clouds, but with a strange dimness, like the sun passed through a thin layer of ash. "Someone's out here," she whispered, standing. "Someone who shouldn't be." Ranger barked once, a sharp, decisive sound, then took off along the bank, following the tracks. Emma ran after him, lungs burning in the frigid air. She slipped more than once, but Ranger slowed just enough to keep her in sight. When they reached the canyon mouth, Emma hesitated. The walls towered above them, jagged, too still. The air was heavy with an ozone tang that made her tongue tingle. Ranger stopped suddenly. Then Emma heard it. A faint cry. A child. Her heart lurched. She sprinted into the canyon, Ranger matching her pace. The cries echoed strangely against the rock, bouncing in unpredictable paths. She followed Ranger's instincts instead. And then she found him. A boy, maybe 7, standing knee-deep in the river, trembling violently. His jacket was torn, his lips blue, and in his hands, cupped carefully, was another red-spiked fish. This one still alive. Its spikes pulsed like slow heartbeats. "Don't touch it!" Emma shouted. The boy flinched, nearly dropping the creature. Ranger barked, positioning himself between Emma and the water, hackles raised. Emma approached slowly, palms up. "Sweetheart, put the fish down. It's dangerous. It could hurt you." The boy shook his head violently. No, it's calling. I can hear it. It says it wants to go home." Emma froze. "What did you say?" "It talks," the boy whispered, eyes wide and glassy. "Not with words, but in my head." Ranger growled, low and protective. Emma swallowed hard. "Okay, listen to me. We'll help it go, wherever it needs to go. But let me take it, all right?" The boy stared at her for a long, shaking moment before nodding and extending the fish toward her. The thing writhed in his hands, spikes stiffening as if sensing her. Emma reached for it, and the canyon floor shook. The boy screamed. Ranger lunged forward, pushing Emma back. A fissure split the ground a few meters ahead, water blasting upward in a geyser of boiling mist. Through the spray, a massive shape rose, dark, slick, scaled, Something ancient and serpentine pushed through the riverbed stone like it was sand. Emma grabbed the boy and stumbled backward. "Run!" Ranger positioned himself between them and the emerging creature. His growl was deeper than Emma had ever heard. Protective, primal. The fish in the boy's hands vibrated violently, as if answering its mother. The creature burst fully from the ground then, a monstrous river serpent unlike anything she'd seen. Its body shimmered with plates of dark crimson, spikes running down its spine. Its eyes glowed a furious gold orange. And it wasn't alive in the normal sense. Its movements were too stiff, too rhythmic, like a heartbeat guiding muscle. It wasn't hunting. It was retrieving its young. The fish in the boy's hands let out a piercing pulse of light, and the serpent answered with a bone-shaking roar that rattled the canyon walls. Ranger barked and charged. "Ranger, no!" Emma cried. But Ranger didn't attack. Instead, he intercepted falling debris as boulders loosened by the quake tumbled toward them. One struck his shoulder hard, but he pushed through the pain, guarding Emma and the child with everything he had. Emma dragged the boy to the canyon wall, pressing him close. The serpent lowered its head, sniffing the air, eyes fixing directly on the glowing fish. "It's not angry," Emma whispered, realization hitting her. "It's scared." Ranger stopped growling. He looked at Emma, then at the serpent, ears back, tail low. Slowly, trembling, Emma reached for the fish. "Give it to me," she told the boy. "We have to return it." The boy hesitated, then placed the pulsing creature into her palms. It was warm, too warm, and its spikes softened slightly, sensing gentler touch. Emma stepped forward. Ranger moved with her. The serpent's massive head lowered, nostrils flaring. A low rumble vibrated through the canyon, not aggressive, but expectant. Emma raised the fish slowly. "It's okay," she whispered. "Take it. We don't want to hurt you." The serpent extended a forked, shimmering tongue, touching the glowing fish. The creature pulsed once, twice, then went still. For a moment, the world held still. Then the serpent let out a long, mournful groan that resonated through Emma's bones. It coiled gently around the fish, shielding it. The canyon walls glowed faintly red, pulsing like embers in response. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the serpent sank back beneath the earth, stone sealing over it as if nothing had ever broken through. The canyon fell silent again. Emma exhaled shakily. Ranger pressed against her leg, warm and trembling. She dropped to her knees and hugged him, burying her face in his fur. "You saved us," she whispered. The boy sobbed softly. Emma wrapped an arm around him too, pulling him close. "We're okay," she murmured. "We're safe." They sat like that for a long time, letting the earth settle around them. When they finally made the long hike back to Emma's cabin, the sun was low, but the air felt warm again. Ranger walked ahead proudly, tail swaying, glancing back to check on Emma every few minutes. At the cabin steps, the boy turned to her. "It wasn't a monster," he said quietly. "It was afraid." Emma nodded slowly. "Most dangerous things are." Ranger curled beside her on the porch, resting his head on her knee. Emma stroked his ears, feeling his steady breathing. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone in the mountains, not with Ranger beside her, not with the strange, wild world still full of things she didn't understand, but could coexist with. She looked at her dog and smiled. "You and your gifts," she whispered. "Next time, try bringing home something a little less ancient." Ranger huffed as if offended. Emma laughed, and somewhere far beneath the earth, The mountains hummed gently, alive, watching, grateful. The danger had passed, but the memory of the glowing fish and the serpent that rose for it would stay with her forever. Ranger pressed closer. She wrapped an arm around him. "Come on," she said softly. "Let's go home." And for once, everything felt exactly as it should.